strength and your grace would be with them. Lord, I bless you in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, this morning I have a subject that it could be, if not taken correctly, it could feel like I'm digging around in a wound or that I'm being hurtful. And I just want you to know from the outset that I hope I can clearly, you know how they say that if the trumpet doesn't sound a clear voice or a clear tone, how will they know what it's saying? So I hope today I can share a clear voice in this, and yet that there's grace attached. Because I am preaching this because it was something that I experienced very recently. And it just highlighted it and it brought it to the surface, and I'm like, I felt led to share it with you, so that's why I'm sharing it. And so, with that in mind, now that I've scared everybody, with that in mind, just know that I'm right here with you. If this seems to be speaking to you, it seems to have spoken to me. So I'm right there with you. And, you know, the Bible talks about elders, and it talks about them having a good reputation from those on the outside. And I think that if I could bring that qualification to all of us, that we would have a good reputation from the outside. And I think this is one of those areas that can harm the reputation of a Christian on the outside. You know, inside the church, we have each other's back. We care for each other. And when we're a little off, we care. We don't make as big of a thing about it, and we maybe speak into your life, and we take you alongside, and we help you along. But when we are out there, there's just not a lot of grace. And so if we are stumbling over ourselves as Christians, it does hurt the testimony of Jesus Christ. So that's why I want to be clear, not only for our good, but for the good of those that are around us and the testimony of Christ. And what I want to speak to you is about there's areas in our life where the new word is where we become triggered. But I guess I want to use the word oversensitive, where we have a visceral emotional response to something that comes up. And again, if I'm digging around if you're like, oh boy, I wonder what he heard about me, it's about me, okay? You could have heard something about me because I had this response not long ago. And I was just like, why? I'm so disappointed in myself. Like, I know this thing triggers me. Why can't I just walk away and not have this emotional... Because it hurts my reputation. It does. Because I get a little weird. And I think you all know there's just areas in your life that maybe your brothers and sisters and those around you know, just, you can do everything, but just don't do that one thing. Okay? Because we're oversensitive in that area. And I guess what I want to say today is don't give any room to the devil. These things have been strongholds maybe that have taken place in our hearts. And I hope this will come across as a balanced message in the end. So the question that you can ask yourself is, are you an oversensitive person or are you an undersensitive person? And right now I'm just going to talk about general terms. Let's not go into a specific area. We'll go with that later. But just you as a general person, and it might be valuable for you to understand yourself as you think about these things. What is my natural tendency as a person? An oversensitive person, generally speaking, just to know yourself, is I regularly take things personally. You have general feelings of insecurity, and you often don't feel like you are good enough. You're affected by emotions of other people, and a good test of that is if you're watching a tearjerker movie, you'll probably tear up and cry. That's me, okay? So if you're thinking, well, he's preaching at a weird crowd, well, I'm part of the weird crowd. So a generally oversensitive person, is very conscious of their surroundings, and they're generally very sensitive to whatever's going on. They're maybe naturally fearful. And generally, generally you would know that you're sensitive. Because you're a little bit off from other people, maybe. You know that things affect you a little bit more. And again, we're not talking specific areas. We're just talking, we want to just get a baseline of who you are naturally as a person. So that would be the oversensitive or the sensitive person. The undersensitive person, in general terms, is you feel others are sensitive. You aren't swayed by others' emotions because it's not logical. You're always right. And you're naturally a little bit more of a risk taker. You like to delve out there and see what happens. And you're not really sensitive if you fall flat on your face. Some of us, if we go to the ski slope, our whole idea is not to fall down. That would generally be the sensitive kinds, the careful ones. There's other ones that are like, oh, falling down means I'm pushing myself to where I should go. That's just a part of the process. If you don't fall down, man, you ain't skiing. So that tells you a little bit about yourself, of who you might be. If you feel that if you're good, and there's not a lot of things that bother you, and you probably are undersensitive, or you are a good spot. So in other words, you're not conscious of being oversensitive or anything like that. So that might just give you a general baseline of who you are. So if you're generally a little more sensitive, things are going to hurt you a little bit more, or you're going to take it more personal. Others of us, it's not personal, it's just, we're here for a good time, and we're more risk-taking and whatever. We're not that fearful. So how should we deal with these things? So naturally speaking, out in the world, when we think of psychology and when we think of just how the world deals with these things, there's two ways to look at it. And there's two schools of thought. There's stoicism and there's victimhood. So the stoic is like, pain is good. Bring it on. If you're not having a little bit of pain, you're not living. Or something bad happens and they just put their head down and they plow through it. And that's how some people deal with sensitivity. What they don't realize is they are being injured. There is a hurt. There is something happening, but they've chosen to override it with a strong mind and control of emotions. That's stoicism. The other one is victimhood, where you would tend to think that everyone's against me. identifying others as the cause for an undesired situation and denying personal responsibility for one's own circumstances. In other words, I'm just here and I can't get out of it, and I'm a victim. So those are out there. So you have the general baselines of who we are, and I am not preaching against general baselines. That is how God made us. Some of us are a little more sensitive, some of us aren't. You don't have to feel bad about that at all. That's just who we are. One person sits there and is kind of tearing up as the movie goes on, and they're really watching intently. The next person is flipping through their Instagram feed, and they couldn't care less what's happening on the screen. That's not wrong or right. It's just your makeup. And it's helpful to know who you are in all of these things. Stoicism versus victimhood are more just worldly ways of dealing with it. And there may be some of either one of those a little bit more in each one of us. So that's just kind of the introduction, right? Baseline, knowing how people out there deal with these things. So now let's look at Jesus Christ, our example. How was he? Was he sensitive? Was he not sensitive? Was he stoic? Or was he a victim? How did he come across? Because that's, after all, who, again, going back to the baseline of, I need to have a good witness with those from the outside. And if I'm being triggered continually, emotionally, it's just not, they're going to be like, whatever he has, I'm not sure I want that. But if we're just nothing phases us, and our friend dies, and we're stoic, and we don't show any emotion, I'm not sure people really want that either. So how was Jesus? Was Jesus undersensitive or over? Was he touched or untouched? Was he a stoic or was he a victim? Well, I would say he was none of those in a sense, but he was everything in such a balanced fashion that you could never really put your fingers out and say, well, we know how he's going to handle these situations. We know what his response is going to be. Because when I am very sensitive or unsensitive, and people know me, they just know they know that, oh, if I say something to this guy, he's going to struggle for 3 weeks, and then he'll get out of it. Or the next person, I talk to him, and he's like, oh, okay, yeah, really. And you're like, did he even hear it? So let's go through some of these verses. John 11:35. Jesus wept. So here was a situation where somebody had died, and the Jews looked at it and said, see how he loved him. Like, they looked at it and said, they didn't say, these were outside people. They didn't say, oh, look, he's so sensitive. He just cries at the... No, they looked at it and said, wow, this is Jesus, that teacher from Galilee. Look, he really loved this person. So when you look at it, Jesus was not predisposed to weeping or not weeping. But in this situation, he wept. It emotionally affected him that he had tears. So he was not a stoic in that nothing would affect him. So it says that in I believe it was one of the prophecies of Jesus, it said that he's not the one who cries in the street. So he lived a quiet life in some ways. But then you look at, I'm not sure where the reference comes from, it's some verse 28 from somewhere. It says, then Jesus cried out in the temple, teaching and saying. So he could be quiet, or he could be very vehement. He did not have a predisposition to only one way or only another way. In Mark 14, 60 through 61, the high priest stood up and came forward and questioned Jesus, saying, "Do you not answer? What is it that these men are testifying against you?" But he kept silent. So on one hand, he cried out. On another hand, he was silent. He didn't cry out at every situation. And he wasn't just silent in every situation. Here we have a situation where John 2, 14 through 17, he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. And he made a scourge of cords and drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and the oxen. And he poured out the coins and the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who were selling the doves, he said, "Take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business." His disciples remembered what it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." Here he was consumed with a zeal. But it was because they touched his Father's house. It was not about something that personally came against him. So at times, I guess what I'm trying to point out, at times Jesus was like a lamb. Other times he was like a lion. Sometimes he was quiet. Sometimes he was loud. Sometimes he wept. Other times he said, "Don't worry, they're not dead. We're going to raise them." And he didn't have tears. He had the right response for every situation. And I guess my heart is that we collectively as a group would be at that spot. That we have the right response to every situation. We are not so predisposed to one way or another that we can't weep when somebody's weeping. That we can't feel bad when somebody feels bad. But when there's a situation where we need to step in and speak strong words, we can also do that. We are flexible. What an oversensitivity or an injury that is not healed by God creates is a solid set of rules of how that's always carried out. And that's what I want to get into next. So we see we all have a little bit of a predisposition to one way or another. We also see that Jesus he wasn't predisposed to one way or another. He was very flexible in how he responded to different situations. Today, I've chosen not to talk about the undersensitive person. That might be a message for another day. But today I want to talk about oversensitivity. And what I mean by that is emotional responses to things that come up. In other words, like a trigger. And I want to just walk through that a little bit and think about it in ways maybe that we haven't. And again, I'm speaking this from experience, so don't feel like I'm just speaking to you if this applies to you. But I think it's important enough that we are healed from these things so that we have balanced responses to the outside world. Not just, it makes it harder for a family, it makes it harder for those around me, but I think this is such a good thing for us to get a hold of. So one of the things that I want to speak about is what causes an oversensitive response? What causes an emotional response? What causes that visceral reaction you have to something that comes up? What causes that? And I would contend that most times there was some kind of a hurt, or there is some kind of a hurt. And I'll explain why I make a difference there between those two. So I broke my leg, what was it, about 5 years ago, actually very close to, I think it was in January. So it's very close to my 5-year date. So I think there's a lot of things I can take from breaking my leg. When I broke my leg, I was extremely sensitive. That leg was extremely sensitive. And I knew it, and it was a good reason for it, and everybody had grace with it. Like, if somebody would move that leg in the wrong way, like I remember trying to get out of bed and in bed, my wife would very gingerly take a hold of my leg and lift it. And she didn't feel I was out of line when I would be, oh, don't do that. Because she knew there's an extreme hurt going on. So there is a time frame where when we are injured and we are hurt, there's a time when we all have like sympathy for it, and we care for it, and we gingerly take, like it'd be a concern of the doctors if they'd be like, oh, it doesn't hurt. We're not stoics. When we get hurt, it hurts. It does not feel good when somebody does something against us that is wrong. It hurts. And if we're just like, well, it doesn't hurt, something's wrong with us emotionally. And so it's very common. It's just natural to be very sensitive to that. You don't put weight on it. You know it's an injured part of your body. So that's how part of that process works. Now, when complete healing comes, if my wife would bump me a little bit, we're sitting somewhere and she just bumps me, and I would like hit the ceiling, she'd go like, there's something wrong. Like, why didn't that heal up? So there's a time for a hurt. But I can tell you something that has happened through that hurt, and it's healed, but it's not healed great, if you will. I still have a real insecurity in that leg. I used to favor it. Like, I had extremely good balance, just always had good balance. I don't trust that leg anymore. I'm insecure a little bit with that leg. So to take you a little bit of how can these things happen, it generally happens through a hurt. Somebody has emotionally, spiritually, something has happened to you, and you feel hurt. And then that hurt it heals up, that maybe it's not quite as hurting as it was, but there's still an insecurity. And out of that insecurity also come things that can cause these reactions. If we go to Ecclesiastes, it says, also, do not take seriously all words which are spoken. If you look at this in a different translation, it says, don't try to be an eavesdropper of other conversations, so that you will not hear your servant cursing you, for you also have realized that you likewise have many times cursed others. Basically, it's saying, don't be so sensitive, because how often have you used those same words for somebody else? And in Proverbs says, a man's discretion makes him slow to anger. So if you hear something and you sense that thing rising up in you, and you know this is something that I'm continually triggered and emotional about, almost always you can track it back to a hurt and an insecurity that you've received through that. So if that's the case, if you're sitting here and thinking, yeah, I know a couple things, I could tell you some things in my life that I'm just a little weird. Like, if you would push me there, I would have a response that's not normal. Okay? That's because I feel insecure about that area, because I've been injured, and it hasn't really properly healed. But it's not a very good testimony to others around me. Because it shows that I'm not healed there. It shows that I'm not really at a good spot. So how do I'm here now. I have been hurt. I have an insecurity in an area. And I understand that I'm a little weird and a little sensitive to certain things above and beyond what is normal. I guess that's not what I'm saying. You might be an insensitive person, but there might be now areas that you are extremely sensitive on. You might be a more of a sensitive person, but you are hypersensitive about certain things. It just exposes that there's something going on there. So if we're there, now what do we do? How do we get out of that? And I think proper healing is definitely what we need. But how do we even start that healing process? One of the things that when I am insecure, I feel like I have to defend myself. I feel like I have to make a defense because I don't like the way I respond to it, but I have to defend it. Because after all, I am a normal human being, and so it is okay for me to have this weird response. So it makes you feel defensive. And you feel like you need to defend it. Instead of turning to the Lord and saying, all right, it's not for me to defend. You are my defense. In Psalms 18:1 through 2, it says, I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock and my fortress. And I think in other translations it says my defense and my deliverer, my God and my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. It's the Lord. And I think those are the things that we need to look at for defensively. Everything we go, like a good sports play has defense and offense. Defensively speaking, when these things come our way, defensively we have to say, I'm not here to defend my insecurity. If I defend my insecurity, it will not be a good testimony because it's an insecurity. I feel this way still, but Lord, I look to you as my defender. I rely on you for my defense in this. So that's a start. But then how do we make an offense and take this as an offensive move? And the way I look at it is responsibility coming from love. There are times where you are called to have a strong reaction to things. If it comes from a hurt and it comes from an insecurity, it will not work. But if you're having a strong reaction to something, let's say you're in town and there's somebody abusing a girl or something, and you have a strong reaction to that. You're not doing that because you have some kind of hurt in your life. You're doing that as you're defending her because it comes from a responsibility coming from love for general people. So if we have strong reactions to things, it should be coming from not a provoked place of insecurity, but from a strong responsibility coming from love. 1 Corinthians 13:4-7 says, love is patient, love is kind, it is not jealous. Love does not brag, it's not arrogant, does not act unbecomingly. It does not seek its own, it is not provoked, does not take into account for wrong suffered. How did God do this? In John 3:16 it says, for God so loved the world. He came, he saw a need, And he came from a point of love and responsibility. How was he loved? He loved us, and then he was responsible. He responded to that need, and he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send the Son into the world to judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him. So you can judge your responses when you have and I guess what I'm trying to say is not all emotional and strong responses, not all of those are wrong. But you can judge yourself, is this coming from me being triggered personally, or is this coming from me having a strong feeling of responsibility and love for this person? And I will tell you, if it comes from a hurt and an insecurity, it will not work. You had better left your mouth shut. But if it comes from a strong sense of responsibility and love, it will work, because love never fails. I don't really have great answers of how the healing process looks like or what you need to do. My heart is today is to expose it for what it is, and I guess put all of us at a position where we look at it and say, that's not quite right. Lord, I need your help. I need your healing. I need you to fix this. And also to understand that not all strong responses are wrong. Some of them come from the right place. But ultimately, it's us finding our security in Jesus, becoming like a child, coming under Jesus Christ's security. If I am secure under Jesus, so many of these insecurities will be healed. So I guess I don't have the answer maybe for your specific healing. I think we heard from Dan the other Sunday. The way that the one guy got healed was he stayed in a place of grace. He stayed in Bethesda. You know, another guy was healed because he dipped 7 times in the river. You know, another lady was healed because she came and touched the garment of Jesus Christ. Another person was healed because they let him down through the roof. So how you get healed varies. So seek the Lord for the healing for your specific situation, because if we're not healed properly, we will work out of insecurities in our life, and it will not be a good testimony. It will not do what we want in people around our lives. So to wrap it up and to leave you with that, hurts that cause insecurities will cause oversensitivity. The Lord is our defense. We don't need to defend our own positions. And if we start operating from a heart of love with responsibility rather than emotions from insecurity, the Lord will be our security, and we're not just a stoic who is not involved in other people's lives, but it will do good and right things. So hopefully this will give you some methods of these areas. Looking at those hypersensitive areas and bringing them to the Lord and asking for specific healing and saying, Lord, if you don't heal me from these, I'm going to continue operating out of insecurity in this area, and I'm going to hurt other people. And then looking at your life and saying, it's not a matter of me not having strong responses, but do those responses come from a place of responsibility and love, or do they come from personal? So hopefully that will be a good exercise for you in the coming week as you respond to different situations. Maybe you can think back, Yeah, I think that one maybe wasn't from responsibility and love. I think that one was from an insecurity in my life. And these things are not healed in a day. Sometimes they might be, but other times it takes time. So I hope that it feels like I don't have a lot of solutions for you, but God is your solution, and how you are healed from it varies. So leave that to the Lord. But my prayer and my heart would be that we don't look at these areas and just say, that's how I am, and continue in those areas and not be healed from them. So God bless you in that, and I'll turn the time back to